three regulation packages are kind of nearing that point in time where we are ready to submit them to the department. We've done an initial screening and checked with our legal counsel that these regulations are kind of in the right, following the right track and compliant with the Automotive Repair Act and so on and so forth. But we haven't done the formal review internally, and prior to doing that, we wanted to share them with the group here. So we pulled together three packages that are kind of further along than some of the others that are under development, and we'll continue to do this at future advisory group meetings or following future advisory group meetings. So here we are today to present those to you. The three that are on the table for discussion today that have been publicly noticed are a package to establish minimum standards for brake inspections, and I'll emphasize inspections, not repair of brake systems. And that was a package, I think, that was initially requested by some, maybe not all, in the industry. And as I mentioned at the advisory group meeting earlier today, we had an actual package that had made it pretty far through the regulatory process. Public comments were being accepted. We hadn't really received any comments in opposition. I think there may have been a couple of comments that led to maybe even a renoticing of the package so that we could clarify some additional aspects of the proposed text. But then late in the public comment process, the regulations were pulled based on some comments that we received, and we said we'd go back to the drawing board. And so here we are again with the package, more or less as it was when we last submitted it. There may have been some changes that were made as a result of those comments that we received when we had previously tried to move this package along. The second regulatory package that we'll be having the public discussion on and workshopping today is a package to establish minimum standards for windshield replacement. We got into this issue because of some interest, media interest initially. I think Curtis Ming and Carl Curtis had expressed some interest in this due to some incidents where there were some vehicle accidents that questioned the integrity of the windshields on the vehicles in which those collisions and accidents had occurred. So there was also, as follow-up to that, there was some legislative interest in doing something, I think by Mr. Hill, and we, my predecessors, had suggested that we might try this through a different avenue, through regulations. So this package has been drafted with those interests in mind. And then the third package that we'll be looking at today is on the smog check program side, where we will be looking at updating our certification processes for the school approval and instructor approvals that we do, and lead to the and which lead to the certification of both schools and instructors to be able to teach smog check training to our licensed smog technicians, both doing inspections and those doing repairs in the smog check program. So these are the three packages that are up for discussion today. We won't be able to entertain discussions, and we're not prepared to entertain discussions on any of the other regulatory proposals that are kind of working their way through the various stages of the development, but we will add them to future workshops as we move throughout the year with our upcoming advisory group meetings. I'm going to turn it over to Vince Soma, our Legislation and Regulations Coordinator at the Bureau of Automotive Repair. He'll do the presentations on the first two proposals, the brake inspection standards and the windshield replacement standards, and he'll open it up for comments after the presentation of each one, and then we'll move to the third presenter, Greg Garrett. Greg Garrett from our Smog Check Engineering and Research Branch will do the final presentation on the certification of schools and instructors. Up here with me are Doug Bellotti, Assistant Chief of the Bureau of Automotive Repair, and Legal Counsel here at the Department of Consumer Affairs, Kurt Hepler, who is Bureau of Automotive Repair's Legal Counsel. A question, Charlie Peters from the audience, before we begin.
Charlie Peters, Clean Air Performance Professionals representing motorists. I just would like to very strongly compliment the Bureau of Automotive Repair and this process and its opening process and allowing people to know what's going on and recording the meetings and providing this information for anybody who's interested is very much a delight and appreciated. And I'm sure everybody here today and many of the people out there appreciate this significant change and improvement. Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback. All right, Vince, take it away. You're up.
Need 1 second here for this thing to
Technology always seems
start.
to slow us down sometimes.
But, good afternoon. I'm Vince Soma. Like Pat said, I'm the Regulations and Legislation Coordinator for BAR. Yeah, sorry, there's no thing here. Sorry, the connection fell out on the laptop. We're going to start on the brake regs. I don't need the PowerPoint for the first couple slides. I was starting with the history of it. Like Pat said, BAR was approached by industry. That first bullet should say May 2010. That's my mistake. By industry stakeholders with a need for a minimum guideline. So BAR started developing one. In February 2013, we were almost there and withdrew it because there was some conflict within the industry as to what exactly should be included in that standard. August of last year, we started this package again, and we're hoping to have it done sometime this summer. And now, obviously, we're at the point where we're ready to workshop it. So the necessity, other than industry asking for this, was to address some consumer complaints. And as you can see, in 2011, we had 507. 33 of those resulted in investigations. 2012, an increase. And then in 2013, a slight decrease to 478 complaints and 14 investigations. For the last 3 calendar years, brake repair, inspection fraud, and oversell complaints averaged about 3% of all the complaints received by BAR, and 1% of all the investigations that BAR initiated as a result of complaints received. Over the last 2 calendar years, undercover operatives of BAR, while doing undercover runs, were on average oversold $220 for brake jobs, stuff they didn't need. Not that they weren't good brake repairs, it's just they were unneeded brake repairs. So we plan on adding Section 3369 to Title 16 within Article 8. And now we're just kind of going to go over the text, and I'll pause after each section.
3 regulation packages are kind of nearing that point in time where we are.
These regs are only about a page long each for the brakes and windshields. So the section we plan on starting, if authorized by the consumer, a vehicle brake inspection performed by an automotive repair dealer shall at a minimum include the following. I don't believe that this piece would be too controversial. The first part of the standard would be a visual inspection of the service and parking brake systems for broken, leaking, worn, missing, incorrect, or otherwise irregular assemblies, components, or hardware. We provide that the parking brake, an independent parking brake system, doesn't need to be inspected, providing that the consumer is provided written notice of its exclusion. Does anybody have any? Does anybody have any comments on that?
Vince, would it be easier just to go through the entire presentation and then just open it up for comment? You can go back to slides. We've got that capability. So I think that would help you, so you don't have to drop the mic every now and then.
The second part of the standard would be a measurement of the friction materials to include the pads, shoes, the drums, and the rotors. And then again, a provision that those need not be done for independent parking brake systems, provided the consumer is informed. Checking the vehicle's brake fluid level. And then we come to the reporting requirement of this, which is that consumers will be informed on the invoice or on a separate document of the results of the inspection, including the measurements. And the measurement's a little different here. It requires notification of the actual measurement of the friction materials and the steels. I realize that that's a technical cleanup that we need to make at this point. Differentiate between the actual linings and then the drums and rotors. But it also requires notification of the manufacturer's minimum discard specification as a point of reference for the consumer. The report will also list, the invoice will also list broken, leaking, worn, any discrepancies that were found during inspection, and the brake fluid system's fluid level. So again, the highlights. The inspection requires a visual component. There's measurements of the friction materials, the fluid level check, and then the disclosure standards for the inspection and the measurements, and then whether or not the parking brake has been excluded from the inspection. That is it for the brakes. Like I said, it's brief. It's only 2 subsections. Really just intended to set a minimum standard. Prevents anybody from going above and beyond that. I will start with questions.
And if you could kindly introduce yourself for those who are listening in on the webcast, I know that will be particularly helpful. Thank you.
My name is Dave Abraham. I'm with Sears Auto Centers. One of the measurements that we always do when we do a brake job is taking a look at the run out and the thickness variation on the rotor for pulsation. Is that going to be included in the specifications?
So can you repeat that?
The thickness variation or run out, which causes pulsation on the brakes, is that going to be a measurement that's going to be required?
It's not currently included. Rick, that sounds like a technical question. Yeah, and that's the point of this workshop. If you see something glaring that we've omitted or you feel it needs to be taken out, this is the forum for letting us know that.
I'll take over your mic, Vince. Right.
We have 2 we could share.
Rick McClarty is kind of stepping in on the technical side of the discussion here from our, he's in charge of Northern Field Operations.
Okay, so that's something we'll take a look at after this. Again, we're not prepared to respond necessarily to your comments, but it's definitely something we'll take under advisement when going forward with this reg.
Jonathan Morrison, California New Car Dealers Association. We've been working on these regulatory proposals with BAR for the last, I think, several years now. From our perspective, we think that our dealers do the best repairs for brakes or any other component in the industry. We follow the automaker standards in everything we do. There is a history of brake repair frauds in the industry. BAR's done a really good job in policing that. I mean, the very well-publicized Midas investigation, I think, is a great example of that. You shut down a lot of shops, stop some bad guys from continuing to defraud consumers. But BAR's always had the authority to go after unscrupulous behavior in the automotive industry. You've always had the authority to go after people who aren't adhering to manufacturer specifications. That's just the standard baseline expectations for repairs to be performed by an automotive repair dealer. My concern is now you're creating a new set of standards, and in this revised draft, it's well drafted, it's well simplified, but you got to think of the impact this is going to have on the industry. There's a lot of new things that people are going to be required to do that aren't included in the factory specifications. All of our automakers give our dealers a list of things you're supposed to inspect with any repair. Anytime you have just an oil change done at your dealership, you're going to have the multi-point inspection. They're going to inspect the brakes. They're going to give a documentation of that. But this is getting to, I think, a level where the disclosures to the consumer are going to be overly emphasized. I mean, now you're requiring measurements to be disclosed in that sheet that you're giving to consumers, either on the invoice or on the multi-point inspection sheet, of the thickness of brake pads and shoes and rotors and drum diameters. That's a lot of different measurements, and we're always working with consumer agencies and consumer groups who are concerned with over-disclosure. If you're giving a vast list of different of measurements to consumers, how are they going to understand what that means? I think it's going to be, a disclosure to the point where it's going to be irrelevant to the vast majority of consumers. We'd like to, as has been our position this entire time, continue to work with BAR to work on educating the industry on what standards are for repair, what's expected, but to create a new list of standards, I think it's going to get those repair shops that actually do follow the laws, it's going to create compliance difficulties for them when maybe it's not necessary to do so.
Thank you. I would just say that measurement becomes, for consumers, and I speak as a consumer when I say this, is that maybe by allowing for the measurement and the discard specification gives consumers a point of reference. A lot of places use a yellow, green, red standard. That means nothing to me as a consumer. Red, it all depends on driving habits. I mean, I understand that. But again, we're just trying to address that concern from a consumer protection standpoint. Comment.
Hi, Craig Wells, Inland Smog and Repair, also ASCCA. I think that this is great. I've been doing this for years. It definitely eliminates any confusion to the consumer. We deal in fact. It's fact. It's a fact that this is the measurement that it is, and this is a fact that the measurement that the manufacturer states is the minimum. You're below that minimum or you're at that minimum. I just wanted to say that. On a second comment, I would like to say that there's when we are the rotor specifications, you say minimum discard. What about machine 2? Machine 2 is about, 30 thousandths above that to allow for wear after performing a, proper brake job. So if you say that, it's still above the minimum specification, but yet after machining, it's going to be below the machine 2 specification, then you kind of run into a real issue there. But I bring that up.
Thank you. Good point.
Craig Johnson, Automotive Service Councils of California. I'd like to bring up 3 quick issues. First of all, I'd like to thank BAR. We brought this idea to the table along with you. We were concerned because of the Midas case. There was mention from BAR that Midas didn't do brakes to industry standards, and Jack Maldonoff mentioned that we couldn't find any minimum standards, so we thought we'd entertain this idea and just bring it forth to see if we could get some kind of minimum standards. There's people advertising free brake checks, possibly luring people in, and so we just wanted to put this out there. But I just want to thank BAR for bringing this forward, because I think ASCC's view is that it's needed. I want to state that a poll of our members, when we do inspections, we all already document, or most of us, we already document that it's on a kit, brake inspection, and on my computer system, I hit one key, it comes up, and then I drag 2 specs up to it's within 30 seconds it's on there, the minimum specs, and so my techs record brakes now, the measurements and the minimum standards, everything's on there. So it's what we do now, and I think it makes us as an industry look more professional. When a customer gets a brake inspection, it shows why we sold the job to begin with. So that's our stance on that. Number 2, per the gentleman's from Sears, I want to answer that as far as run out. When we were discussing this, and I think this has been going on 5 years when this came out, and when we first started on this, and run out was brought up, and I think that the reason that was taken off was because this was just an inspection. It started getting too technical, and we started getting nicky-picky. Okay, so if it's run out, okay, what's next? Because emergency brake was on there as well, and it just got too much. And so they decided on, in fact, there was a repair, they took repair off the plate, but it just got too picky, because we just want to know the standards, and that was it. And that's why they took runoff. But I can understand your point why you'd have that, because that's a serious issue. But that's why that was taken off. Thank you.
Craig. Anybody else with any comments on this one? Questions, suggestions?
If anything comes up
Yeah.
as you're thinking and as you're sitting here and thinking about the proposal, we can certainly entertain that later in the discussion of today. And there's always opportunity to contact Vince after we adjourn today. So don't think this is the only opportunity to comment on this draft proposal. And there'll be a formal public comment period. So there are many opportunities.
I guess without further ado, we'll just jump into the windshields. The impetus for this reg was kind of a Call Curtis article detailing a 1999 accident where a woman who wasn't wearing her seatbelt was expelled from her vehicle in part because the windshield was not glued in correctly. This sparked interest on one of the legislators' offices, Senator Jerry Hill, and the previous administration said that we would attempt to do something through regulation to kind of bring attention to this issue. So that is what we're doing here with the minimum replacement standard, since inflation removal, that's where this can go wrong. So in May of 2012, the article came out, again detailing an accident from 1999. February, we were approached by the legislatures, and we're hoping to have this one done sometime in July 2014. Again, I believe it's a pretty straightforward package, but here are the complaints that BAR received per calendar year relating to auto glass. As you can see, it's kind of been a downward trend, and auto glass accounts for about 1% of all complaints received annually. So it doesn't make up a huge workload for us, but it is, of course, a point of concern, the windshield being a main structural component of the vehicle, and I believe it's a third of what holds the roof up when you roll over in an accident, so it's kind of a big deal. Excuse me. So we plan on adding Section 3365 to the regulations. Again, Article 8, accepted trade standards. Go through the text now. Section shall apply to the removal and installation of motor vehicle windshields by registered automotive repair dealers. An automotive repair dealer performing windshield installations or removal shall comply with all applicable federal motor vehicle safety standards and vehicle manufacturer specifications. The FMVSS sets the minimum standards for auto glass retention in standards 205 glazing and 212, which I believe is just windshield retention. And those were provided as handouts in the back. Interested in seeing the federal standards. Automotive repair dealers performing windshield removals shall inspect the windshield mounting area for corrosion or other defects that may adversely affect windshield glass retention or adhesive performance. Consumers shall be notified if anything is found. That is because before you take a consumer's windshield out and have a captive audience, it might be beneficial to the consumer to let them know that there's an issue. Use of windshield adhesives will meet the FMVSS or the OEM specs. Adhesives and systems shall be used in accordance with the adhesive manufacturer specifications as well, and applied in a manner that meets or exceeds both the FMVSS and the OEM spec. Windshield shall conform to the federal standard and the manufacturer's standards. And the final invoice will state the minimum safe drive-away time. The drive-away time being the length of time that, per the adhesive systems manufacturer, the glue needs to set in order for the windshield to function as a passive safety device. Again, highlights of the package. All work performed per OEM and FVMSS. Inspect the windshield mounting areas. Materials shall meet the specs. The written disclosures, the notification of any defects, and then the drive-away time. I'll leave that up so you guys can jot it down. My card's also in the back, so start taking questions, comments. Coming to you.
Craig Johnson, Automotive Service Councils of California. Most windshield replacement companies that I see are not registered with the Bureau of Auto Repair. And one, will this require them to be registered? And number two, according to the first line here, said this section only applies to a registered automotive repair dealer. If they're not, would this not apply to them?
So windshield installers are currently required to be licensed with the Bureau. If they're not, that falls under unlicensed activity.
Well, there's a huge, I don't want to be disrespectful, but there's a huge market out there. So we're aware of this?
Yes.
Okay, let me just finish my second question. I think when you replace windshields, just like repair standards, things are listed that should be, the dry time for most glues, that could differ from the manufacturer to the glue they're using. They said to use a glue that meets the manufacturer specifications or better, so they would be required to look at the package versus the manufacturer specifications, and that seems like that would be a conflict because the manufacturer states to do it one way, and the glue, I know it sounds nicky-picky, but I like looking at directions, and so it would clash, I would believe.
So,
thank you.
I don't want to get too into the technical of it, but regardless of what adhesive you use, there's going to be a dry time on that. And the requirement would be to notify the consumer what that time period is. If it's a Ford glue or a urethane and it says an hour, the drive-away time is an hour. If you use something from DuPont, that's a half hour, it'd be a half hour. It doesn't matter. It's based off of the glue, regardless of who the manufacturer of the glue is.
One more thing, please. Pat, per the regulations that I was talking about this morning, Business Professionals Codes 9880, it's on the third paragraph. It lists services that are excluded by bar, and on the end it says, and other minor services. And hence the reason I wanted to, if we could revisit this regulation, because that looks like it leaves a big gap of possible unregulated activity that could be said, well, this is minor services. I know it says service stations after that, but it could be construed that way. That's why I wanted to see if we could entertain the thought of going back to this 9880 and 880.3, looking at that. Thank you.
Other questions?
Thanks, Rick. Hello, my name is Gene Lopez. I am with ICAR. A couple of things, Vince, that if we look at Section 5 of this draft, on the final invoice, notify the consumer of the minimum safe drive-away time. We probably should review that. And since you've got both bullets on there, drive-away time is the length of time that, per the adhesive manufacturer, the windshield adhesives needs to cure. The word cure there is also up to interpretation. So perhaps full strength may be a better term there, but maybe that might be something that your legal team would probably want to review. And the safe drive-away time, that is also can be up to interpretation based on what the vehicle manufacturers says, what the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard says, and what the adhesive manufacturer says. So maybe even removing the word safe and just notify the consumer of the drive-away time. All too often, you may see vehicles driving down the road with blue masking tape, and the consumer is told, well, don't roll up your windows and don't take the tape off until tomorrow at this time. And so that caution is the safe drive-away time that they're speaking to. And if they're allowing that car to go down the road with the masking tape on it, it's probably not safe to drive. And one other note is on your Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. There's safety standards for stationary glass and there's safety standards for movable glass. They should probably be identified in the regulation as to which safety standard you're speaking of. Thanks.
Thanks, Gene.
Let legal jump in here for just a second. First of all, thank you for your comments. We were joking up here about whether drive-away time meant the time that the blue tape had to stay on. If there's certain terms of art that are not, drive-away time, if I went to, a safe light or something like that, I said drive-away time, and everybody scratched their head and said, we don't even know what that is. We need to know what the industry vernacular is. Please let us know what the appropriate term would be if it's not drive-away time. Second thing I was going to ask, you said movable versus fixed glass or stationary glass. I'm assuming that's, for a guy that was a technician 25 years ago in the Conestoga wagon era, I guess that's like the windshield, the rear windshield versus the side windows. Okay. Thanks.
Next up.
I was just going to make a minor point of clarification on that 9880.1 provision. I think it's easy to read into it that other minor services is kind of just an open bag for anything that's subject to interpretation, but it does limit it to things that are basically expressly by regulation identified by the Bureau of Automotive Repair as services that are customarily performed by gasoline service stations. So I know it's always been my interpretation, I think BAR's interpretation, that windshield repair and windshield replacement is not a minor repair activity. That's excluded.
Hi, my name is Alan Akers. I'm with Autoglass Express. I am a certified technician for Autoglass. I am an instructor for the state of California to the insurance industry. And I just want to clarify, the blue tape, first of all, is not to hold the windshield on. The blue tape is strictly there for people when they put extra mold, when they put the moldings on the vehicles. That keeps the molding down on the car so it doesn't move when they're driving it for the first 24 hours. As far as safe drive-away time, the federal regulations actually spell it out that when they talk about safe drive-away time, it has to do with the cure point of the adhesive getting to a point where the actual passenger side airbag can work properly in a front-end collision of at least 30 miles an hour. So that means if the car was to go out the lot, let's say an hour drive-away, safe drive-away time, and the vehicle gets into a front-end collision, the airbags deploy, the windshield will restrain, will stay intact, and the airbags will do their jobs that they're designed to do and save the passengers. If it's before that time, the windshield could actually be blown out, and there's plenty of demonstrations they do around the country with AGRIS, the Safe Windshield Council, Auto Glass Safety Council, which I'm a member of. That's what the safe drive-away time has to do with. It does not cover rollovers in vehicles, which are 1 out of 10 accidents are rollovers. It does not cover, side or anything like that. It's for front-end collisions up to 30 miles per hour is what the federal regulation is designed for. I hope that clears up. Anybody have any questions on that? But the tape doesn't hold you in.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Just again, a comment on the terminology and the methodology of cure time versus full strength. I think we should take a close look at that.
Thank you.
Jack Molodanoff, the comments that were talked about the drive-away time, I'm not a technician, but I remember one of the discussions we had, there was an issue of what the cure time is, come to full strength and so forth, but they talked about the differences in the temperature, humidity could affect the cure time, so colder areas, warmer areas. I mean, you may be meeting the manufacturer specs, but if the temperature, that could have some kind of effect, and I don't know if that should be taken into consideration in this section as well.
Yeah, again, Jack, so typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but typically the relative humidity of about 70 or 75% and the temperature of about 72 degrees is the optimum temperature for these urethane adhesives to cure. It may not come to full strength at that point. If it's colder, it'll certainly take longer. If it's warmer, it could happen sooner. So that's why ICAR is taking the position on having the urethane or the adhesive come to full strength.
Thanks, Gene. Any other questions, comments, concerns, endorsements? All right. Well, then I think we'll, again, we'll be here through we have one more reg that we need to talk about, and I'll turn that over to Greg Garrett here in a second. But if anybody has any other comments or questions that they come up with between now and the end of the day, please feel free to bring those up to me. Or my card is back there. You can contact me directly on these. So I appreciate your time on these. Greg?
Thanks, Vince. Good job. Greg Garrett, an air quality engineer in our engineering and research branch. Now, tell us what's in store with the school and instructor certification process.
You never know what's in store, Pat. That's the deal. Good afternoon. My name is Greg Garrett. I work with the Bureau of Automotive Repair. Today I'll be presenting the regulatory updates for bar certified schools. Happy New Year. Glad to be here. Hope everybody's healthy and well this year. We're going to go through 2014 in a positive way. That's what we're looking for. That's my little side note. So these regulations, generally speaking, are regulations that are being put into place to correspond with the license classification changes that occurred in smog check previously and the training to support those licenses. So this sort of solidifies what we're doing and updates those regulations and clarifies and revises those regulations. In that process, we're refining the school certification and instructor certification requirements. As part of that, we are creating a single certification class for instructors and schools. The current regulations say that there's a basic and enhanced area for each. It's cumbersome, probably it's not necessary, so we're simplifying that. We're also extending the terms for both. The current rules say that the term expires 1 year from the time of certification issuance, and we're extending that to 2 years. For the instructors, we're going to correlate that with their smog check and technician license, and so that they do all these things all at once instead of having the licenses expiring every year. Everything will just be a package. They send it away. It makes it easy. What's not listed here, but all added refinements is that we're also looking at streamlining and sort of updating the qualification process, which means that private schools will still have to meet private post-secondary rules, meaning being approved by a Bureau for private post-secondary. But what we've refined or added here is we also identify the exemptions that apply. Private post-secondary has certain exemptions, and we identify that here. So because of that, we also added a few other consumer protection issues, which is one is that a refund policy needs to be disclosed at the time a student is enrolling in a course or before, which is not such a big deal. Essentially, if you don't show up to class, you don't get a refund, whatever your policy might be. It's disclosure. Also, we're looking at things for instructor certification, that we're going to put some limits on the amount of times an instructor can apply to become certified. The process specifies that instructor certifies there's an evaluation after they apply, provided they meet all the other qualifications. Sometimes we'll get a person that maybe needs to improve their skills or their knowledge, and they continue to retake that evaluation. And we're sort of limiting that. We're saying we're going to limit that to 3 times. So those are a few things that when I say refinement, just things of that nature. Generally, it doesn't impact folks who are already out there and operating. The update also goes towards the training standard, and this is the second bullet. And what that is there is a standard that was put together in 1993 that's in some ways kind of become extinct as technology has moved forward. And we've got that document in a kind of a protected area. We're going to breathe life back into it, essentially update it to today's standards. And the nice part about it is that the schools are going to be able to be using this document in a way to deliver training. I'll explain that more later. Now, something new, and by the way, not limited to smog check here, is the introduction of non-technical training. And that's something we'll talk about again later, but this is an item or something that's kind of been on the radar for a long time in the Bureau. We've got feedback from the industry. There may be a need, and we'll explain that. So kind of give you an understanding of what that platform means. We think that what this can do is provide a training or a forum or a platform in which we can get into in the industry, or I should say the industry that actually can approach with us, working with us to create training that could benefit ARDs, smog stations, brake stations, lamp stations, and it isn't necessarily limited to us either. We're sort of allowing for the industry and the educators to come up with things that we as BAR serve as a platform conduit to serve that to industry. So we'll discuss a little bit of that later. A couple other things I just thought of is that on the refinement portion up here, we're adding things like manufacturer training. And what I mean by that is that currently or in the past, some of the instructors would have to take training from another instructor, a certified instructor, to renew their smog check license. Here we're saying we're going to create flexibilities that with that instructor, if he's had manufacturer training, factory training, if you will, or training to maintain the certification for their school, a NATEP certification, that training, if it's applicable, we would allow, or we could allow that to satisfy the update training requirement for their licenses. simplifies that. And kind of also flexibility we currently, with dealerships in a way is that we recognize that dealerships have a lot of good technicians, and we probably would like to see them licensed, and they do a lot of good repair, and we have a license class for them. Sometimes the deterrent is that the training processes that we have in place are separate from the work that they do every day, and this could potentially provide us another the flexibility to say that that training would satisfy a license renewal requirement, which might entice or make. Actually, I should say it differently. I think that what it will do is even further refine our processes to reflect or to coincide with some of the best practices that are going on in the industry. Like I hadn't gone to the academy on how to use this yet, so. Excuse me? Yes. What? Why isn't it going? There it goes. I guess I probably placed it 5 times, so it's going to flip here 5 more times. So going to the standard, I mentioned on a previous slide that we will be updating the standard. So what this really is a separate independent document that's referenced in regulation. So what we're going to be doing is what we'll, in general sense, is that the regulation text itself is going to have the qualification or the requirements to become certified. Once you're certified, well, how do I deliver the training? So rather than having all those kinds of all that kind of information in the regulation, it's not reasonable to do that. We're going to have it in a separate document, and that separate reference document in part will include the training standards for the smog check inspector training, level 1 and level 2. And level 1, as you may know, is for somebody with minimal or no experience. They got to take a certain kind of training, and we specify, we create the outlines in this document, minimum competencies. And we also do with level 2, which is what everybody has to take, which is smog check inspection training, where procedural part of the training, administrative of the program, that sort of thing. That's a smaller course. Smog check repair technician training, there's an option that BAR has allowed for where somebody can, if they have the right amount of experience, take a BAR certified training courses or program and get in, and this provides to those trainers the expectations, the standards they should follow to provide that training. What's nice about this is that this is a document that is derived, or these outlines were derived originally from the job analysis for smog check inspector, smog check technicians. So we know what knowledge, skills, and abilities are needed for that job based on these analysis, and then we build outlines and competencies that move forward to that. And we provide that to the instructors, the schools. The schools look at that and they say, okay, these are the things we need to cover. We have content areas, that sort of thing. We provide information about the program. We provide materials about the program, about smog check, that sort of thing. What we don't do is provide the automotive technician, the training portion of it, the automotive related training. The BAR, we certainly have people who can do that, but we're saying to the industry experts, here's the areas you cover, here's the competencies you need to make sure the person leaves with, the learning outcomes, if you will. This is how you do it. And so what's nice about that is the instructors then can tailor the training as they see fit to fulfill the student needs. If they're in a class where it's very advanced and they find that they maybe need to skip over a few or not spend as much time in certain areas, they can do that, provided they meet the minimum competencies in the end. So you can see that it's simply a template for them to provide training, and we think it'll work pretty well. The standards for diagnostic and repair training, the item up there, that's something new, and what that essentially does is close the loop on our smog check side of what are repair standards. People say, well, what do you mean BAR repair standards? Well, we don't create the repair standard, but we identify what that is in our regulation already, and that is 334041 if anybody's interested. And it talks about the industry standards that are derived from the vehicle manufacturer, practices or procedures, and then any nationally recognized, found in national publications, something to that effect. So we're closing the loop here. As I mentioned to you before, we said that we're providing sort of a template that these experts in education are going to use to develop training. In the past, we often said, here is the training, teach it this way. Now we've created this flexibility, which has been well received. We need to close the loop back to what is the standard in the regulation already, and that's what we're doing here. So when the person's creating the automotive technical side training, they know I can select off the shelf materials, which is great. It's already done. I can do that. Some instructors say, well, yeah, but I like to create my own because sometimes new technologies come out and some of the formal information is not available, but they're very good at what they do and they create training on their own, and this allows for that as well, but it gives them a checkpoint. They can say, okay, my training I'm creating, it's consistent with the standard, with the technology, with what we understand about technology. It's not some guy that would be out there training something that's counter to what the vehicle manufacturer says, or if it's a broad item to what is accepted in our industry nationally. It'll include things like also standards for distance learning, web-based training, that kind of thing. I haven't got into some of the detail. We have experts at our place. We have a gentleman, Mr. Carlisle, that's good at that sort of thing. We'll be working with him and other folks like that to try to create specific language. This document will be ready in a little while for review. I'll explain that later. It'd be something like ratios for, we already do, by the way, for the smog check training. We provide them like a ratio of how much can be web-based, how much has to be practical, applied, that sort of thing. So that's where we are with this manual. We think this is a good concept. There was one in 1993. It's extinct. We're breathing life into it. I guess I have to do this. So here we get into this different kind of thing. We've talked about things we kind of know already, the technical side. We have smog check. We have training for smog check. This is all related, but it's a little bit a different nuance to what training has been in the past. And before we get too much into what is non-technical training, I want to go back down to the bottom and to the last two check marks there, really. And it's sort of, this was created, we're looking at this for largely two reasons. One is to respond to the repair industry, and the other is that it may fulfill some need with some disciplinary actions. So what I mean by response to industry is that over the years, when BAR, and I'm a former field rep, I've been with BAR a long time, and I've talked to a field manager yesterday to confirm my views, and we often go into BAR, shops say to us sometimes, and that you're only coming around when there's a problem. You come to me when there's either a complaint, an inspection issue. What can BAR do to help us run our business in a better way? Is there a way that I pay my registration fee or my licensing fees? Are there ways, or a mechanism in which BAR can provide more information to me other than when I've done something that may be perceived as not the right way to go? And BAR has responded over the years. We've done right at right training. We still do, and our field reps do a very good job of interacting with the stations and shops and ARDs to do estimate training, right at right, that sort of thing. But this is something that is beyond that, or could be beyond that, to where we're creating this platform where industry, again, and educators can have a forum to create training that may be even outside of BAR's borders in a way. And I'm not saying, and mind you, this is a discussion, this is a workshop. I'm not saying this is what we're doing. I want to make sure you understand that there's some concepts. So we could do something where a trainer, for instance, would look at doing right at right training and say, okay, let's package that with training about laws and regulations that are related to other areas of regulation that you automotive folks deal with when you run your business. Maybe it's toxic waste handling, maybe it's hazardous waste, maybe it's, hey, windshield replacement. That might be technical. I didn't want to get into that. Anyway, so you could see that there is a way that there's packaged training, other kinds of training, ethics, that sort of thing could be delivered in a broad way, in a different way than just the technical aspects about a smog program, a brake program, and things. And so that's sort of it. On the disciplinary action side, in the past, we've had times when a judge or an ALJ or something would prescribe training based on a case, and we don't have something in place. They would say something to the effect of BAR training regarding some ethical behavior, or BAR training related to service writing, or something of that nature, and we don't really have anything in place. We do have right at right. I want to make sure we're clear on that. We do a lot of that, but there's this idea that that BAR has training in place, and there's not, and so this would potentially fulfill that sort of need as well. So non-technical training, what does that mean? It's not always necessary. What we're looking at really is laws and regulations, Again, I mentioned it could be broad laws and regulations dealing with you working. If an educator wants to put some package together and present it to us, we have our blinders on. We're looking at bar stuff, but you provide us potentially information on why Talk 6 thinks it's a good idea, why I said we might sponsor that, right? Service writing, which is a good one. We polled, actually we're doing a poll of our schools now on how many offer service writing training, and a preliminary response, I think we're getting like 35% of them or so out of 110 schools. This is smog check schools, so it's a little limited, but the idea there is that we're trying to find out what we need and is there a need, and this will fulfill that need. If we train people on how to repair cars, but the person at the service writer desk doesn't know the laws, doesn't know the rules, doesn't understand any of these sorts of things, there's a gap. Is there a need here? We're going to talk with industry educators. If they see a need, this potentially provides that, again, a platform. Ethical practices, that's an interesting one. We've had people coming to us and say, what about ethics in this industry? And we like to point at the Auto Repair Act. We like to say, well, we have this Automotive Repair Act, and here's our ethics. And you could point to that. You could say, yeah, that is ethical if you follow those practices, but isn't there some way to bridge that gap between the black and white law, the absolute, versus putting you in scenarios when you're the expert, there's behavior that's expected of you as an expert, how does that work? The difficulty might be is that what are standards in ethics, what kinds of things? So again, it creates this forum where an expert can put something together that applies in the automotive industry that we might sponsor and say that's a good idea. Things that, when somebody's not taking training, for example, I'm accepting these vehicles for repair. I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm following the Automotive Repair Act as far as estimate writing and all that sort of thing, but I don't know about this car. I'll figure it out. Is that ethical? Maybe not. I know many of you, I think Automotive Service Councils actually says in their ethics world that you should strive to continue to educate yourself in all aspects, and that's something of that nature. So that would be a start point. That would be an identifier where maybe schools can identify scenarios in which ethics can be applied in a training course that isn't just black and white law and regulation. Other training that could benefit operation of an ARD, and this is interesting, so if you legal folks note in the draft regulations, this is in a separate section from the bar certified school for smog checks, and the reason is so we can open it up in a larger view is for ARDs, brake, lamp, and smog. And so anything that would benefit the operation of an ARD, a smog check station, brake, or lamp station, could be something we'd be interested in. And we're taking the census that we're the consumer agency, but we think a well-informed shop is a benefit to the consumer. We think that when a shop understands what their business is, and they can understand it better because there's a mechanism where the regulatory agency has provided a platform for people to provide that information to them, that's a benefit to the consumer. The non-technical training does not include instruction related to servicing, repairing, or inspecting vehicles. That's a big distinction. We want to make sure we understand that. So it would cover training about the transaction of the repair, not the repairs themselves or the services themselves and that sort of thing. And so that's a clear transition, and you can see if folks in dealerships, folks in larger shops, that people have personnel in the offices and things, training like this could apply to them, but maybe it's not such a need for the person that's out in the shop, or maybe it is. So that's it. There's other things that we've got in this regulation package. I just think I want to briefly mention that I probably skipped over. And one is that exam scores, going back for the schools, is that we're looking at putting language, and we have some draft language in place there, that we would post a cumulative, or we could post the cumulative student exams, state exam rates online. So if somebody takes smog training from your school and they go take the state exam, how are those students performing? That's a little secondary issue, but that's one that was also in this regulation package. And that's generally it. And I'm pretty much done and open for comment and question. Here's a status. This is sort of when we expect things to occur. I don't know if it's on. Is it on?
It's on. Yeah, Jack Mullidonoff. I want to first thank the Bureau of Automotive Repair and all that have been working on this, especially the part about the non-technical training, including that in there. You know, we've spoken about this for quite a many years, and the idea behind it, and you've touched on it, was that if someone out there in the automotive repair industry gets in trouble for, you know, with BAR for something minor maybe, but instead of having up to a $5,000 fine or penalty, the option could be to go to and take a ethics class or service writing class. So that was kind of the concept there, and having the ability for someone who for education and training. So I think this is an important section here. I know you've touched on it. You're doing, and I know you're still sort of mulling around. I think it needs to stay in here. I think we need to continue working on it. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, because I think this is really going to have an important impact on the industry and providing that what you call platform for others to come in to, that have better ideas on all kinds of non-technical training to educate the industry. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. I wanted to quickly mention that you mentioned whether they would take training versus some other fine. This regulation package isn't going to target that sort of thing. And however, it does sort of play along with or interplay with the disciplinary guidelines that are in the process. And so I know what you're referring to is and I mentioned that if an ALJ or a judge or something thinks that there's a need for training and they identify that training in that process, this could at least support that we have schools that can provide that training. I don't want to, this would never get into, as far as I'm aware, where we're saying you use the regulation text here to avoid some other enforcement action that is related to our enforcement group. I'm only talking about regulations for the school side and the instructors.
Gene Lopez with ICAR. Greg, along the lines of what Jack just defined, it's sort of driver's school. You get a ticket, and instead of paying that fine, you go to a driver's school. And those of us who have been through that know a lot more about the driving regulations or laws and the privilege that we have when we have that driver's license. The same would be true, and let's talk about Right It Right, because I'm a student of Right It Right for the collision repair industry. And let's say it's a case of work billed not performed, and that estimator or that adjuster was found guilty of not writing it right. Without the traffic school, if you will, that person could very well continue to write it wrong. And so I think Jack has a valid point, and I understand how this is not part of your draft, but the language could certainly be introduced. This would be the time to introduce that.
Well, I wanted to point out, and I kind of led towards it, is that with disciplinary guidelines, there's a regulatory package that's in the works. It's not, and I can't speak officially about what it is, what's going on with it, but that would be where some of that sort of information would probably reside, where again, a judge, ALJ, something of that nature would take in consideration what they have in front of them when they're resolving this and say training is in need. I want to also go back and point out that currently, I mentioned that earlier that industry sometimes grumbles that you only come here when there's a problem. And so our field reps do a very good job right now to go out, meet with industry, provide them Right It Right guidance. We have online training for that. They do special actual training seminars on their own with dealerships, with independents. They sit down with these folks and go through it all. And so what we're pointing at, what I mentioned here on this check mark that talked about some disciplinary actions, I don't want to derail it, because what this would be is, and you both have valid points, is training is an important part of getting somebody to write it right or to do it correctly. And that's why this is valuable. It allows for this disciplinary action or disciplinary guidance process to take place because we then have a school that's certified to deliver that kind of training. I just want to, there are some distinct lines here. This is about how those schools become certified, but it's not just for that purpose. We see this as a way that the industry and the educators can get together in this forum and provide something we would sponsor would help, and that the enforcement side of it is another element of it that we have now in place where the judge can point to. Yes.
Yes, Charlie Peters, Clean Air Performance Professionals. There seems to me to be an interesting piece of this that might be considered to be added to it, and that is, in listening to this conversation, I would assume that the information that comes from the manufacturer is always valid, always correct, and that there are definite ways of doing this that's available to the provider of service. And it takes me back to a time quite a long time ago when we put in a portion of the smog check program, and we were going to require all cars that were gross polluters or tampered to go to the referee to get certified. And what happened was we built a significant backlog there very quickly. And what we found was that there was a significant amount of cars that were getting repaired and going to the referee and failing. So the Bureau of Automotive Repair got a very smart idea and decided to bring in a Bureau of Automotive Repair person and coordinate with the customer and take the car back to the station that had done the repairs and ask them what they'd like to do. The result of that was that there was quite a number of hundreds of cars that went back, and every one of those cars that was worked on to get repaired passed at the referee the next time through the referee, every time, no exceptions. So there are lots and lots of cases where any professional technician knows that there's lots of invalid information as to how to fix cars, information that's not correct. I asked a question of the previous chief of the Bureau of Automotive Repair, what do I do? What does a technician do if they run across a situation where they're going through a checklist and the next thing to do, it says to replace the computer, and the technician knows that the computer in fact is not bad? Are they required by the Bureau of Automotive Repair to replace that computer? And her answer was, absolutely. And I threw up. Nobody else in the place responded. We're demanding that we spend oftentimes the state of California's money to provide fraud to the customer, and the car is getting a repair that is not necessary. And it was just extremely inappropriate to me. There is a portion of this that should be incorporated in this education process that empowers people being educated and being trained to be able to get through and actually fix what's wrong with the car and get the car repaired properly, even if the information that's being provided to them is incorrect, and give them sources of ways of finding that out, which is what was happening in the instance that I gave as an example. Because the guy had the car, he had a telephone, he had a computer, he had any number of things at his hand to be able to successfully do the repair, and he could go ask Pat DeRay, he could go ask you, he could ask anybody how to fix it, and ended up getting it fixed correctly every time. And we're a long ways away from getting cars actually repaired every time, as evidenced by the huge lack of sales of the fill neck restrictor that's the number one failure in fuel evap testing, that the only part that really fixes the car is not being used. Not one of them of 1,000 that's been provided and advertised for 3 years has been sold, not one. So there is significant opportunities to improve the quality and performance and fix more of the cars that are being broken by adding something to this process that will train technicians to act ethically and figure out what the car really needs and get it actually repaired. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. You covered a lot of ground. I just want to point out, though, that as I mentioned earlier, that our separate document is identifying standards of repair. Basically, we're closing that loop, vehicle manufacturer practices or recommendations, practices in the industry. I think what you've described is an idea that there's a mechanism in which somebody would look to find some repair procedure outside of that realm. we wouldn't go that route, but what you did say is you talked about certain studies that we might learn from and disseminate information, and Bureau's open to that sort of thing, right? There's an idea that, we are not, that we just say, well, we're not responsible, it's those folks over there. We're the Bureau of Automotive Repair. If we can in any way identify practices that manufacturers follow or national industry practices that are followed that maybe people aren't aware of, we'll make them aware of that. Question? Wait just one moment, Charlie.
Craig Johnson, Automotive Service Councils of California. I just want to tag on to a comment that Jack started and the gentleman from iCar stated. And my comment is born from a conversation about a month ago. The local bar office, which is in South El Monte or Riverside, I know some of the field people, and they call and ask me kind of what would you do kind of thing. And they had a case where a vehicle, another shop put a brake master cylinder in a vehicle, a rebuilt one, and it failed, so then they put a new one in, and then right after that the booster failed because it was contaminated with brake fluid, and there was really nobody's fault. And so he was just asking me what I would do, and first of all I told him I don't put in rebuilt master cylinders, but when I do that I always inform the customer to replace the booster, or at least inform the customer that. And that's just one many examples of something that I might do and that a lot of shops would do, but the gentleman that didn't do this wasn't really doing anything wrong. He just didn't know that this is the way we do it, or to inform the customer correctly. And so this kind of avenue that Jack and the gentleman here are talking about, I believe is really needed. It's just it's now out here to this is the way some of the shops do it, and it avoids problems, and it's safer for the customer in the end. So I fully support, and ASCCA fully supports this non-technical training. Thank you.
Charlie Peters, Clean Air Performance Professionals. I'd like to add to those comments that I made that you kind of responded by going a little sideways on me, and that is that there's a lot of cars that factory procedures are not correct. As an example, back some time ago, they ran something like 200 undercover runs in Southern California, primarily against ARCO stations at the time, and got something like 300 hits off of those 200, and they were using underhood recordings with a video camera to see what was going on. What happened was that ARCO worked the deal, and those people were supposed to go get training, which they were doing. And what was found was that the particular cars being tested, the procedures for functionally checking timing and EGR were not valid intentionally on those cars, and the procedures that were used were not the factory procedure, and the people got equivalent of a citation and had to go to school because of not following the factory procedure, which was invalid, and did not find out whether those systems actually functioned or not. A significant corporate player went to their attorneys in Chicago and asked them what to do, and he says, well, take it back to the Bureau and get this reviewed. Well, but we are in trouble with the Bureau. It doesn't matter. Take it back. It's critically important that this becomes valid and that the cars that are broken can get fixed, or identify the ones that are broken. And that went back to the Bureau about 3 times. It ended up going to the #1 educator in the state of California, who was educating these people, who informed me that, yes, in fact, that was absolutely correct, and they were taking that information to the Bureau of Automotive Repair. Finally, after approximately 2 years, I took that to Mike Vanderlyn, who's now retired. He says, the only way you can resolve that is by suing Charlie. I think that's an important thing to get incorporated in the education process, so that people can realize that there are sometimes different procedures on a car that are different from what the factory procedure is, and that we need to get the cars that are broken actually identified and repaired.
Thank you. I think we've gone far enough down that road. We could probably talk all day and forever about scenarios that are very, off the target. They're very valid, but I don't know where we would be going with them. The nice part about this, however, as I mentioned, we're tying that loop on the smog check side about repairing the vehicles to what the repair standard is, which is these procedures that you guys are referring to. Bureau's not setting that. And so, in effect, we're giving latitude for the experts to present the expertise to the person taking the training with this package. So we're actually allowing for that more than we have in the past, where the Bureau might disseminate a course specific to what somebody at the Bureau might have developed. So I think we're all in the same thought process here, and I believe we're moving in the right direction. And any more comments and information you have in that regard, please send it to us. Vince is going to be taking over the regulation processes at this point, likely, although we may make a few more tweaks before we give it to Vince. And then I will be available for the technical information, correspondence, dialogue, that sort of thing. And are there any more questions or comments at this point? All right, well, thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful for you all. And I'm going to quickly go back to the status page so you get an idea. We're looking probably at the end of the year, really, before some of this comes around. Thank you very much.
Greg, thank you. Very, very well done. And as we move each of these packages forward to the department, we'll be sharing with the department the comments that we received as part of these pre-regulatory workshops. The department actually has used this process as a model for other boards and bureaus here at the department to move regulatory packages along. So I'm happy to say that kind of we were led the way in this effort, because it does, I think, help the department with all of its boards and bureaus in moving regulatory packages forward to address the big issues on the front end, as opposed to later in the process when you're in a formal rulemaking public comment period, and then are hit by surprise with a comment from those who haven't been communicated with, and it's always kind of derails the efforts of the department or that board or bureau in its goals to get changes through with its regulations. So we really like this process, this front-end process. It really streamlines things. It is a lot of work, I will say, but it saves us time, I think, on the back end. So good job, everyone, Vince and Greg in particular, to do this, and thank you, Rick, for jumping in on the windshield and brake inspection standards. I'm glad I never have to have the last word. Thank you, Jonathan, for I always struggle with ways to close these things. So, Jonathan, maybe you want to close.
A lot of times I have the last word because I talk too much and people just want to go away. And in an effort to kind of, in that same spirit you closed in, how you're looking to avoid derailment of the regulatory process due to surprise comments. Actually, Chris and I related back to the windshield regulations. We were just kind of huddling up and kind of wanted to bring up one practical consideration for the invoicing part of it, where you'd be required on the invoice to say how long that safe cure period is. The vast majority of times at a car dealer or even independent repair facility will be having a customer's car's windshield replaced. That's going to be sublet, just because they're so much better at replacing windshields. They do it all the time. They know how to do it. When that takes place, if a customer comes into a dealership, they want to have their oil change and they want to have their windshield replaced because there's a crack. The dealer's going to sublet that out to the windshield shop down the street, and that's going to be performed. If you require on that invoice to the customer the cure period, that's going to be completely irrelevant by the time the customer ends up getting the car. And I'm concerned that by the time the customer, 2 days later comes in, they get the estimate, or it's not the estimate, the invoice for the vehicle, and says, oh, you have a 2-hour cure period before this vehicle is safe to drive. That could cause some confusion, some unnecessary concern. So just, one practical matter that Chris and I were just thinking about, wanted to raise. But as far as, I think I can speak on behalf of all the industry, we really, really appreciate this ability to go through this pre-regulatory introduction workshop process. It does help clear the air, bring up back and forth between different interests in the industry. And again, thank you, Chief DeRay, for your leadership in this area.
Thank you. That's a good comment that you made. We'll have to take a look at that on the sublet issue. Gene?
Yeah, thank you. Gene Lopez with ICAR. In that same scenario, that scenario is very sound in that it could be on the invoice, could be 2 days later that customer picks up their vehicle. However, in a collision repair environment, Friday afternoon is typically when you're delivering cars because Monday morning is when you brought them in. And one of the last operations prior to cleaning the vehicle to deliver would be installing that windshield. It's been painted, it's been color sanded and polished, maybe detailed, and now it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and that sublet vendor has just arrived to install that windshield. That's when the cure time, or that's when the full strength time really comes into play. And that it's important at that very moment that the manager or owner of that collision repair facility makes the decision to release that vehicle that afternoon or wait until Monday morning. So there's 2 different scenarios there, and we need to be aware of both of them.
Mr. Morrison, thanks for bringing the sublet issue up. I was just curious, in the collision repair world, number one, I'm assuming there's some cars that by the time, pull off the freeway or whatever, there's no windshield actually to take out. You're just going to put one in because it's already gone. So does that change anything from a regulatory perspective? And the second thing is, does the sublet work in the front end too, in the collision world, where you come in and it's the front end is a total, you sublet the repair out for the windshield replacement, and there's a problem there, obviously because the front end is probably damaged, does the safe lights of the world, do they tell the consumer, hey, we've got an issue, or does the body repair shop have that issue as well? I'm just trying to think of, if a vehicle comes in, it's towed in, obviously the windshield probably isn't intact according to our regulations here. Is that workable in that somebody's going to pull out the windshield, okay, well, it's already gone. Okay, so now I do an inspection. Who do I tell? Is my consumer at that point, in fact, the collision repair shop, assuming it's sublet, or is it in fact the ultimate consumer of the car? Because the glass repair company may not know who that person, who the owner actually is. So, is there any? No, I'm just, again, one of the things that we struggle with from a regulatory perspective is 1, clarity, 2, necessity, 3, overall burdensome on the regulated industry. I'm just trying to, as we go through this process, I think, speaking as a new counsel to the Bureau, my perspective is those closest to the fire, probably one of the more experts in putting it out. So those that are working with collisions and auto body glass in the collision realm, and also from, mobile repair or more, Safe Flight came out to my house after I hit a rock or whatever. Is this workable? Are there issues that we may not have seen, like the sublet? You have a 2-hour drive time, cure time 2 days ago. That's the issue. So I'm just thinking of the front end process. Is there any subletting issues, any notification issues in the front end that we need to be concerned about? Anybody follow what I'm saying? Or is more coffee? I'm not sure. So I entertain any comments on that.
I can respond to that. And so typically the final invoice is delivered by the collision center, and so it would be the collision center's responsibility to notify their customer or the consumer on the front end. And let me make this statement. If the windshield isn't there, the last installation was done improperly. So the glass for the most part is going to be there. It may be damaged by the passenger side airbag. And so one of the first operations will be to disassemble the vehicle and what we call blueprint the vehicle to prepare it for the repairs. And part of that blueprinting process would be to remove the damaged windshield. And that's going to be a sublet operation. It's important that that sublet vendor come in and remove that glass, that windshield, to certain specifications so that when it's installed properly with what they call a full cut, but that's down the road. So, and at that point of disassembly, removing the damaged windshield, the repairer, the collision repairer, will be able to identify, certainly if there is any rust or something abnormal about that. Forgive me for not remembering the area that the glass is installed. There's a particular name to it that is escaping me at this point. But in that area, if there's rust in there, if there's damage in there, if they need to cut and section a portion back into there, that's going to be the responsibility of the repair. And as I said, it's based on the final invoice, and information about that repair prior to repairs and after the repair is delivered would be the responsibility of the collision repair shop. Pitch well.
Thank you, Gene. Any other comments on the windshield or the brake inspection? All three of them, actually. The packages that we draft packages. Were drafts available of each on the back table? And will be posted. Are they posted on our and available on our website? Well, they're in draft form.
They will be under the regulatory section.
Regulatory section. Okay, good. Yeah.
Top section there, and we'll have draft copies.
Okay, good. Good. All right. Well, thank you once again. It's been a long day. For those of you who started with us when we began the advisory group meeting this morning and are still with us, thank you very much for your patience, your attentiveness, and participation. And we'll look forward to doing more of these later in the year, and we'll provide ample notice in conjunction with future advisory group meetings. So thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Thank you.